Tech here, and I'm back with another PC build. This time we're doing the best PC that you can get, or the best PC parts that you can buy for under £700. And this right in front of you is the list I created on PC Parts Picker. So of all the components that you need in our all the components that we will need in our PC build. So I chose PC Parts Picker for the same reasons for the last two builds, because it gives you an estimated wattage on what your system would require. So this will give you a sort of will give you a better idea of what kind of power supply, what kind of wattage of power supply you need in your build. As you can see in our case, just showing 469 watts, but if you plan on overclocking the system like the CPU and GPU, this wattage would probably be up in the 700 range. So you have to kind of accommodate for what you're gonna use the computer for. So if you're planning on overclocking, make sure you overcompensate for the power supply, as in get a bigger wattage than what you think you'd require, just to give you that extra headroom. And maybe if you want to add some other another GPU or other parts that might be more taxing on your PSU or power supply. Okay, so if you look down, the total price for this build came just under £700, 695, which in my opinion these are the best parts you can get for the 700 at the £700 mark. And let's start with the first part, or one of the main components, which is the CPU and the brain of your system. Okay, for this PC build I've chosen the AMD FX A320. This is an 8-core CPU from AMD, and I chose the A320 and not the 8350 because the 8350 is just a higher clocked. It's the same as the A320, it just has a higher clock by 500 megahertz, and basically you're paying like 20% more for something that you can do on your own. So you can overclock this CPU to the same as the A350, and you get this exact same performance. So there's no reason on spending that extra money unless you don't want. Unless you're not comfortable with overclocking, then I would suggest you go with the A350 if you want that extra bump in performance. So at the moment this PC is £110, which is a great price, and that nothing at this price range could beat this CPU and performance, so that's why we've chosen it. And to core this, as this is an 8-core CPU, so it requires quite a lot of power to run, and it can get pretty hot, so we need a decent cooler. So I didn't go with a water cooling all-in-one kit, because unless you get one that's 240 millimeters, as in the Corsair H100i, there's no really reason for it. All those little 120 millimeter all-in-one loops don't perform any much better, or if at all, than air cooling, like one of the best CPU coolers on the market, which is the Cooler Master Hyper 212 Evo. This is one of the most popular CPU coolers out there, and I would recommend using this unless you wanna to be spending 3 or 4 times as much on an all-in-one cooling system. That's actually worth that much. It's actually worth its money, like the Corsair H100i, which would give you much better performance, but not as much as you'd think though. So this is what I would recommend. Still, it will be plenty enough to cool our CPU, even overclocked. You could, with this CPU cooler, you could potentially get your CPU, the FX A320 overclocked to 4.5 or maybe beyond. but 4.5 stable overclock or 4.4 would be plenty enough for big enough performance increase over stock to make it worthwhile overclocking. So this is what I would suggest using. And then you need somewhere to put your to install your CPU into. You need a motherboard, and this is why, if you're planning overclocking, it really comes in. It's really important to choose a quality motherboard if you plan on overclocking, and this is one of the cheapest ones. This is probably the cheapest one I would suggest buying, and it's the Gigabyte 978 UD3P. I wouldn't go anything cheaper than this, because you won't be able to overclock your CPU to its fullest, and you'll be potentially overheating the VRM modules, meaning you could fry your board. So this is probably the lowest I would suggest. This does have a nice 8+2 VRM phases, which should allow us to overclock our CPU to about 4.5 GHz, even an 8-core CPU. And it does come with your standard accessories. It does have one important thing to look out for when you're planning on overclocking high demanding CPU like an 8-core CPU. You want to look that for this is the heatsink on the VRM modules. Those are what's going to provide power to your CPU, so you really want to find a board that got a heatsink on them to make sure they're cool. If you plan on overclocking and you're getting a motherboard that doesn't have a heatsink, I would really not suggest that, because they won't be properly cooled and you could potentially burn out your board. Other things it does have 2 PCIe Express slots you can have Crossfire on this board. It does support Crossfire, but unless I wouldn't suggest crossfiring on this, because only one of the PCIe Express slots is a X16 slot and the other one's only an X4, meaning you won't be fully utilizing both your cards. So if you wanna crossfire, I would suggest getting a much higher quality board, or much more expensive board. It does have 4 channels, so you can go up to quad channel maybe, but dual channel is plenty. Difference between quad and dual channel is minimal, so dual channel will be enough, so it can support that. It is an AM3 Plus board, which is what we need for our CPU, and it does have a USB 3.0 front panel header, so you can connect so a case that's got USB 3.0 on the front can be connected to the motherboard. And this is it for the motherboard. It's a great motherboard for the price, and unless you're not overclocking, I would not suggest a cheaper board than this. And that's next part of the build is the RAM. So for this system I chose a red colored RAM, just because it's AMD red and black sort of color scheme, but you can choose, like for example, this HyperX Fury series RAM from Kingston. Has 4 color options, you see on the bottom, so depending on what your preferences you can choose everyone, but for our system we want that red and black color scheme, the standard AMD color scheme, I guess. That's why I went with this, and it's also it's 8 GB, which is enough. It's more than enough. No games so far as of release of this video. As of release of this video, which is May 2015, don't require more than 8 GB. You would only need more than 8 GB if you're planning on doing some heavy rendering or image editing and stuff like that, which like using Premiere Pro, which are pretty RAM intensive programs. So that's the only reason I would suggest any more than 8, but gaming 8 GB is more than enough. And this is 1866 MHz, which is it's higher than the usual 1600, but well, I've only chosen 1866 MHz because of the price is cheaper than the 1600 MHz at the moment, so that's what we've gone with it. But the memory, the MHz, the frequency doesn't really impact the performance, like barely. There's a very minimal difference between the 1600 and 1866. The only difference where you see is if you're going well into the 2000 to 3000 range, then you could potentially see a difference, but at this point there's no difference. So I would suggest getting which one's cheaper. If the 1866 is cheaper, then I would suggest you get that. And for storage, we need some storage, and at this point I think everyone should have an SSD in their system. Once you go SSD, you can't go back, and the performance increase that they provide, just any system, even on a 5-year-old system, if you put an SSD in it, it will just make it that much faster. So I cannot for this, so for our system I've chose the Samsung's 850 EVO 250GB SSD. At the moment it's a very good price for 250GB for £78 is a very good price, and this is one of the fastest SSDs you can get, much faster than the Kingston and Crucial's lineup, and you can get 500, I think it's above 500 megabytes a second on read and write speeds, which is amazing. And if you want more storage, I guess you can just get a hard drive, trying to get a hard drive from like an old PC, or you can buy one, which they're pretty cheap now. A terabyte you can buy for like £40. So if you want extra storage, you can do that. You can just buy £40 1 terabyte hard drive and you'll be sorted. But I cannot recommend a system without a SSD at the moment, as the prices have gone down a lot. Like this would have costed about the same, about £200 in a few years back. So at the moment I cannot recommend SSDs enough. And let's move on to what's the main part of a gaming system needs. It's a video card, a graphics card. That's going to be like one of the most important things, and that's where you want to spend the most amount of money you can. It's the graphics card. That's if you're planning on gaming. If you're building a game PC, you just the most amount of money you want to spend is on the graphics card. So you can save. If you want something cheaper than this, you can just save on the CPU, GPU, everything else. Just try and get the cheapest one possible you can. The cheapest ones you can get, and just spend the money you save on getting an even higher graphics card. But for our build, I think I've chose one of the best value for money, value for performance cards that out there, which is the R9 290. This one is the ASUS's Direct CU2 version, which is, for the money, it performs pretty much the same as the R9 290X, and it's much cheaper. So I cannot recommend this enough. This for 1080p will be this will be an overkill for 1080p in my opinion. Where this lies is in the 1440p gaming range. That's where you get a very good performance, even at high settings, and still get over 60 FPS in most games, even newer titles. But you can still use it for 1080p, but it would just be a bit of an overkill for 1080p gaming. So this is one of the best graphics cards in this price range that you can get, and I cannot recommend this enough. It does have 4GB of GDDR5 memory, so it's plenty enough for all the recent games, even GTA 5 I believe. Even if you max GTA 5, depend on 1440p, you might require more VRAM. But if you keep it like high to, if a mix of high and very high, you still be enough. 4GB will still be plenty. And this is the best card I can recommend. It does have the Direct CU2 cooler, which does a very good job at cooling the card, and you can overclock it pretty nicely. It does have this different style fans, so this is sort of a blower style, half blow, half normal. I don't know how to explain it, but it's, according to Asus, it's supposed to perform much better than the normal fans. So in the back you can see this has got two DVI connectors and one HDMI. I think it's a 2.0 HDMI and 1.2 DisplayPort, I believe. And it's just very good card. You can hook up to 3 to 4 displays, I think, on one card, and it's just a very good card. And it's just I can't recommend it enough. Okay, let's move on. So we need somewhere to put our parts, and this will be the case. That's where all our parts will go in. And for this case, I think I chose one of the best value cases, I guess. For the money, this is one of the best cases you can get for about £60. It's the NZXT S340. This is the black version. There is a white version depending on your taste, but I like the black and red. We were going with the black and red scheme, so I thought that would be more appropriate for this build. And it's just a very good looking case. It's the front of the case, there's pretty minimalistic, just like the Fractal Designs Defiant series, which I really like. And it's got big massive window in the front, plenty of space inside for all the components, and it's got one thing to note here: it doesn't have any cages for the DVD, like 5¼ inch bays for DVD or CD readers and writers. So you can't put that. It's just no cages, and it does come with the power supply cover that you see in the NZXT's H440, which is very nice. So if you want to hide away your power supply and the cables, it's very good for that. It does have two inside. On top of that cover, there's two places where you can mount USSDs in, and it does have this really nice plate that covers all your cables. So behind this it will cover all cables be covered by this, and you do have the motherboard cutout here, or CPU cutout, so you can put a cooler in it. And does come with fans as well, included case fans. So you can see here is the big window, so you can we want to see our parts, we want to see what our parts look like in a case, so that window provides you this. And it's just overall a very good case. It does have a pretty high feet as well, so bottom mounted power supplies, we're gonna have enough room to breathe, even potentially on carpets as well. And that is just a very good case for the money. Another thing to know is that it does scratch easily, so you have to be very careful when you handle this case. Like the side window is very prone to scratches, and also the top. You can't see in these pictures, but the top has got a matte finish, which is extremely scratch prone, so you need to be careful when you're using it. And okay, this is for the case, and now we need to move on to the last part of the build, which is what's going to power the build, the power supply. Basically, it's what's going to power all of our components, and this is where you don't want to get anything cheap, because this could ruin your whole system if it goes bad. So you need to be careful when you choose. And for our supply, for our build, I've chosen the Corsair CXM 750 watt modular power supply. It's 80+ bronze certified, so you get that 8+ efficiency, very high efficiency. So, and it's semi-modular, so you don't have any extra cables that you have to worry about tying up in the corner or anything. And it's a very good power supply. Corsair makes one of the best power supplies and I cannot recommend it enough. So as it's semi-modular, you only get the power, the 24-pin motherboard connector and the 8-pin CPU connector. So those are the only ones that you can't are not modulars, but that doesn't matter because everyone needs to connect them, so they're fine. And then you get extra cables in your bag with the PCIe cables for your graphics cards, and SATA and SATA cables, and I think you still get a few Molex connectors as well. And for the money at the moment, it's 70 quid for a 750 watt power supply, which is a very good price. And I chose the 750 watts instead of like 450 watts, 500 watts or 600 watts, because our graphics card can be pretty demanding. Like the R9 can be pretty demanding when overclocked, and the also CPU frame is very demanding when overclocked. So at stock it is 125 watts TDP, which is pretty high, and if you overclock it, that's gonna go up, as well as the R9 290's TDP, which is like 250 watts, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. It's not on the side, but if you see this, what it's about is, so at max load it could go up to 350 watts, so we need that as much headroom as possible in our power supplies to compensate for this. But if you're not planning on overclocking, I would still suggest getting a 750 watt power supply, just in case you ever plan on overclocking, or you want to change out the parts in the future and you don't want to be replacing power supplies as well. So that power, you want to have a power supply that's gonna be able to it's gonna be future compatible, not future prone. It's gonna be more future compatible, meaning it will support your parts in the future and not having to be replaced. So I would suggest spending more money now for the power supply, and then not having to worry about it in the next few years. And this is it for the build, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and make sure you subscribe to my channel and like the video, and click the like button on the bottom of this video, and thank you for watching.